Coming up on Philosophy Talk, loyalty.
I am not and never have been a member of the Communist Party.
Loyalty unites.
Either you're with us,
Loyalty divides.
or you're with the enemy.
And darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand now. Stand by me. Stand by.
Unshakable loyalty. Lifelong loyalty. These are good things.
Divided loyalties, blind loyalty, misplaced loyalty. These are bad things.
Who deserves our loyalty?
Can loyalty blind us to the needs of others?
What should we do when our loyalty is betrayed?
Darling, stand by me.
Our guest is philosopher and poet Troy Jollimore.
Loyalty. Coming up on Philosophy Talk.
Stand by.
Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Accept your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We're coming to you from the studios of KALW San Francisco.
We're continuing conversations that began at Philosopher's Corner on the Stanford campus.
Our topic today, loyalty.
Loyalty binds people together, Ken. Friendships, marriages, nations are built on loyalty.
Try imagining a person who has no loyalty whatsoever to anything or anyone.
She'd be friendless, loveless, nationless. She'd feel no devotion to any higher cause or principle like truth or justice. She couldn't even be a Giants fan, and not even something so inconsequential as a Dodgers fan. A life without loyalty would be empty, devoid of important things that make us fully human.
Yeah, but not all loyalties are created equal, John. Loyalty to a sports team, well, that's a shallow form of loyalty. Loyalty to a nation, that's weighty, but it can sometimes demand too much. Or think of the loyalty of some battered wives to their abusive husbands. Now, there's misplaced loyalty, if there ever was such a thing.
Well, it's sad when you've got loyalty, but you can't trust. You know, if you can't trust your spouse not to beat you or cheat on you, then does your spouse deserve your loyalty? If you can't trust your government not to send you off into stupid wars or unjust wars, then does your government deserve your loyalty?
You know, that question's connected to something else. Earlier on, we said that loyalty unites, and that's a good thing. But loyalty also divides, and that's a potentially bad thing. And those soldiers at war, they are driven to kill each other by their competing loyalties.
Well, think of parents who lavish toys on their own children and then out of the sense of loyalty and devotion, forget about others. They might be able to make a lot bigger difference to the world by just spending a little of that money on underprivileged children in other lands that they have no loyalty to. So their loyalty blinds them to how they could really be the most effective people they could be.
Yeah, and loyalty also divides a person from herself. I mean, loyalty and devotion to your family, for example, can pull in one direction, while loyalty to an employer can pull you in an entirely different direction. And managing such conflicts, that's really no easy task.
Well, maybe the answer is you just have to decide. Like you, Ken, you got to decide whether your highest loyalty lies. Do you want to be a better parent or a better philosophy professor and radio host?
Yeah, but you make it sound like a brute decision, like a sort of existential thing. There must be some principles, though, some moral principle that tell us who and what we owe loyalty to and to what degree we owe that loyalty.
Well, I don't know. That's kind of hard. If you're a utilitarian, it seems like the highest principle is you should always act so as to produce the greatest good for the greatest number. But if that's your view, it seems to me it's pretty hard to make any sense out of loyalty at all.
Well, tell me more. Why do you say that?
Well, Ken, suppose you got two people drowning. You're in a boat. You can save only one of them. One of them happens to be a Nobel laureate who's just discovered a new cure for cancer. The other happens to be your spouse. Which one are you going to save?
Well, that's easy. I save my wife, of course.
Well, not if you're a utilitarian. You'll say you do that out of loyalty, but the utilitarian really has no room for that. Utilitarian morality says you give no special weight to your wife. In deciding what to do, her well-being should count no more, no less, but no more than that of anyone else.
Well, that seems to me just wrong. I have to admit, though, I have a hard time putting my finger on just why it's wrong. My wife means a whole lot more to me than just any arbitrary other person. But does my loyalty and devotion to her really morally obligate or morally entitle me to give more weight to her well-being than the well-being of others? That's a hard question.
Well, let's see just where you draw the line. I mean, suppose it was a matter of saving your wife or letting two other people or three other people or maybe the whole Nobel Prize contingent for a given year drown. Would you still be inclined to save her and let those people drown?
Oh, gosh, John, that's a tough one. I mean, on balance, loyalty and special concern, the special concern that goes with it, that seems to me like a really good thing. But you're illustrating that loyalty can go too far. Where do you draw the line?
We're going to put that question and more questions to our guest. Our guest is poet and philosopher Troy Jollimore. Troy has a very interesting perspective on loyalty as well as love, friendship, and morality.
And we'd love to hear from our very loyal listeners as well. The number to call is 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917.
But first, our roving philosophical reporter, Jill Replicable, looks at the nature of loyalty in sports and sports fans. She files this report.
It's Sunday afternoon, July 11th, in the Civic Center Plaza of San Francisco. Hundreds of people are here watching the Netherlands and Spain play for the World Cup final. Most of them are wearing either orange or red and black. People have their faces painted. They're wearing funny hats. They're yelling and screaming. But there's no American team playing. What are they getting so excited about?
You got to throw logic out of the equation.
Brian Murphy is co-host of the Murph and Mac Morning Show on KNBR, San Francisco's leading sports radio station.
It's an emotional experience. So there's any different number of reasons you're going to find that emotional ties, like why you fall in love with another person. You know, sometimes it's hard to describe why you love a person, but you love that person. And that's the way it is with sports teams.
Of course, one of the main ties that bind is geography. You root for the home team. When that loyalty gets shaken, it can be especially devastating. Consider basketball star LeBron James, who left the Cleveland Cavaliers to play for the Miami Heat.
He grew up there in Akron, Ohio, and he was a hometown kid, and they were so proud of him because he was a hometown kid, and the fact that he played for their team, the Cleveland Cavaliers, made it triply great that they could be loyal to him and the team. That, of course, in loyalty, sometimes you get your heart broken.
When there is no home team, like for the vast majority of people watching the World Cup final, fans come up with all sorts of other reasons to assign their loyalties.
The way a guy plays the game, the way he moves, the way he hits the ball, the way he fields the ball in baseball makes you like him, and then all of a sudden you're loyal to that team. I remember as a little kid, I fell in love with Fred Lynn of the Boston Red Sox. You can get loyal to a team because your dad or your mom rooted for them when they were kids. Sometimes people just like teams because they like their uniforms, you know, and they become loyal in a silly way as a kid.
Alex Martinez is a diehard 49ers football fan.
One of the very first things I remember is playing cards with my cousins, and they had football cards. And then I remember looking at a card, and it happened to be a 49er card. I don't remember the player, but when I saw the card and the uniform, I don't know, he just looked so cool. And I was like, wow, this is my team.
Martinez made that choice when he was a kid growing up in Los Angeles, and he's been loyal ever since, even when the team sucks.
These seasons that they've been losing, I think I've become more of a fan just because it's like, God, I gotta watch these guys, even though I know they're gonna get shredded. So I think the loyalty just grows when they lose.
You have to watch them because you feel like that's gonna help them in some way?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I feel like I'm the difference maker. It's like, God, if I would have watched, they wouldn't have fumbled that ball and, would have kept possession and, scored the game-winning touchdown or whatever. Yeah, it's crazy like that.
And that's what fandom is. It's somehow feeling that you yourself are part of the competition.
David Henkin has thought about sports loyalty a lot. He teaches 19th century American history at UC Berkeley, including the rise of spectator sports like baseball and boxing. He says in the early days of boxing, people tended to root for the fighter that most closely represented their interests.
Boxing especially was built into other lines of political, social, ethnic conflict. So to be a fan of a particular boxer was often an assertion of your pride in your ethnic group or your political party or your gang or your firefighting company.
In 19th century baseball, people mostly rooted for the home team. But what drove Henkin's own baseball loyalty shows how much things have changed.
I was born in France, and when my father would read us the baseball scores as a kid, he would often call them St. Louis. And that probably sounded French to me. I think I like that.
It seems there really is no logic in sports loyalty. Even when fans don't get much back, they tend to remain faithful. Sportscaster Brian Murphy.
Why are you supporting this team with your loyalty and your money and your time when they're not returning the favor by putting a winning product on the field or trading away your favorite player or not drafting a player you wanted them to draft or whatever? Your team is your team, and if you don't stick with your team, you're not really a true sports fan. To get the pleasure of being a sports fan, you have to go through the pain, too.
For Philosophy Talk, I'm Jill Replogle.
I'm John Perry, and with me is Ken Taylor.
And our guest is Troy Jollimore. He's professor of philosophy at Cal State University, Chico. He's an award-winning poet, and he's author of Friendship and Agent-Relative Morality. Troy, welcome back to Philosophy Talk.
Thanks. It's great to be back.
Troy, you're both a poet and a philosopher. Probably some other things as well, but I'll just mention those too. Now, questions about loyalty, love, friendship. Do they appeal more to the mushy, poetic part of your brain or the rigorous philosophical part?
I think sometimes I worry that the philosophical part of my brain is also pretty mushy, so that's an interesting question. But I do think that the fact that I have interest in both of those areas is maybe a little predictive of that I get to be drawn to issues of this sort. There is something about loyalty, of course, that is very emotional. And I think that the report we just heard about loyalty and fandom in sports really gets at that. It's highly irrational in all sorts of ways. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, a rational person, one might think, would always be a fan of the winning team. You know, that's who you want to go see, right? They're winning. Why not be on the winning side? But of course, there's no loyalty in that. And in a certain way, maybe there's no fun in that. Maybe there is a...
You're talking about Yankees fans, and of course, they're largely beneath contempt. But,
Yeah.
So why does loyalty matter in the first place? Why not be like the utilitarian who regards everyone with equal concern and gives no special weight to any particular person or group of people? Or be like the person you described and says, well, what's in it for me? I guess I'll go with the winner, then I'll feel good more often when they win.
Right. And in some contexts, maybe that does make sense to do. Though I do think that what was said in that report is exactly right, that there is a fun in standing by your team when they are losing. And especially if they then go on to win later on, it means a lot more.
Yeah, but you're focusing on sports loyalty, which is,
Right.
not deeply. Well, think about, we want to ask you about loyalty in general and the place of loyalty in a well-lived human life. I mean, why? It seems to occupy a large place. Why?
One answer that's been pretty popular, and I do think there's something to it, is the one that Hosea Royce gave. And of course, he wrote perhaps the most famous philosophical book on loyalty, called The Philosophy of Loyalty. There haven't been that many, but that's certainly a big one. And Royce suggested, I think quite plausibly, that loyalty is a way of giving shape to a human life. To be loyal to particular things is a way of making up your identity. It determines in large part who you are, and it determines what matters for you. So it gives you a direction and a purpose, something like that. And that does seem to be pretty important for human flourishing.
But couldn't I just be loyalty to, abstract things like truth and goodness and beauty and humanity at large without being loyal to, particular people?
There's not a lot of content in that, though. And, you can try to be loyal to beauty if you want, but I've never actually encountered beauty itself. I mean, Plato seemed to maybe think he did or would at some point, but I don't know anybody that ever actually has. I just encountered particular beautiful things. Now, there's still the question of whether you have to pick and choose, but I think to some extent you do. Human capacities are finite. Human life is limited. You can't genuinely appreciate every beautiful thing, just like you can't really be everybody's friend.
Well, just a final comment from me on Royce. I tried reading his book not too long ago, and I must say, I found it very dated. I mean, he was writing back around the turn of the century before World War I and World War II and Nazism and communism and Franco and Vietnam and so forth. And things like that, I think, it tested our loyalties, but also tested our belief in loyalty. I mean, is it really such a great thing?
I completely agree with that. Royce's book is very, very pro-loyalty, and I have no doubt that if it had been written a couple decades later, he would have had a different perspective on that. Loyalty is a very dangerous thing in many contexts, absolutely.
It's a very tribal thing, right? It unites, but it also divides. And we're going to ask you in the next segment about that tension between the dividing power of loyalty and the uniting power of loyalty. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Today we're discussing loyalty with philosopher and poet Troy Jollimore.
We've been talking about why loyalty matters. In our next segment, we'll continue that, and we're also going to ask about who and what deserves our loyalty. It seems obvious that we owe those who are near and dear to us some degree of loyalty, but what about things as large as a nation or even all of humanity? And what about abstract ideals like truth or justice? Does it really make sense to be loyal to such things? You can join us by calling 1-800-525-9917, 1-800-525-9917.
The varieties of loyalty, plus your calls and emails when Philosophy Talk continues.
the Lincoln Southeast Nebraska Knights, the Doane Tigers. Don't those teams pull on my heartstrings after all those years? No, not really. Does it really make sense to be loyal to a school or a nation or some other abstract entity? Isn't loyalty just about personal relationships? I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor, and this is Philosophy Talk. To what and to whom are you loyal? What is your highest loyalty? Has your loyalty ever been put to the test? Has your loyalty ever been betrayed? How do you deal with conflicting loyalties? Share your experiences.
The number is 1-800-525-9917. We've stuck with that number now for many years, and we're very loyal to it. 1-800-525-9917. You can also email us at comments@philosophytalk.org. And you can post to our blog, the blog at philosophytalk.org. Our guest is philosopher and award-winning poet Troy Jollimore.
Troy, in some context, being guided by loyalty seems like a very good thing. I don't opt out of long-term friendships on a whim or just because my friend is less happy, less fun to be around than he used to be. But if my long-term bank starts charging me more for certain services than the bank down the street, I feel free to switch. Indeed, I feel like I ought to switch. Loyalty be damned. What makes loyalty appropriate and relevant in some contexts and not in others? Help us think about that.
I think there's a lot of things to be said about that. The contexts are so different. One very obvious, but I think very important place to start is that the bank quite literally won't care if you leave it. It won't be hurt. Now, if all of its customers left it, then the people who run the bank would be unhappy. But you alone or I alone leaving it, unless we were, a Bill Gates or something, it's just not going to matter. Whereas in personal relationships where loyalty really matters, there's got to be a vulnerability, I think. It matters to the other person and they can be hurt. And so if you leave, you're doing damage. And the damage of a betrayal is one of the most serious damages people can do. In Dante's Inferno, the ninth circle that reserved for the worst people is reserved for the betrayers.
That's a really interesting thought, but one thing it suggests, this is one implication of what you said. So take our song there, be true to your school or be true to your nation. I mean, it seems like if you're right, then those kinds of loyalties are less significant, maybe they don't really deserve to be called loyalties. I can't hurt my nation by objecting to its policies, and not just me alone. It doesn't depend on me, on me directly having fealty to it. So is it wrong to think that we can be loyal to things like nations or schools, or take something like abstract, like truth? Can we really be loyal to the truth? Does that mean anything? Oh.
I really tend to think it doesn't actually mean anything in that context that is so abstract. And even something as abstract as a nation, I think that is somewhat of a secondary and slightly improper usage. On the other hand, we should say nations do depend on, again, not on any individual person, but as George Kateb has pointed out, one of the defining features of patriotism, one of its functions is to get people to do things they wouldn't do otherwise, and in particular to go out and be willing to risk their lives and to kill. Now, that's not necessarily a good thing in a lot of contexts.
But it seems odd to say that the use of loyalty with respect to a nation is kind of a unusual or second-class or derivative usage. We have loyalty oaths. We used to have to take loyalty oaths at the University of California. We have loyalty acts. We have, the idea of being disloyal and being shot for being disloyal. Isn't loyalty to your nation right or wrong? My nation, right or wrong? Isn't that kind of the paradigmatic case of loyalty?
It's language that gets used a lot, and we hear it a lot, but the more you look at it, I think, in a way, the less sense it makes. And it really is hard to talk about this in a consistent, coherent sort of way, whereas in the personal relationship context, I think it makes much more sense. You're dealing with a true, proper object of loyalty. The nation as a subject of loyalty, sure, we talk about that all the time. And what we hear more, in fact, loyalty as a word doesn't get used as much as it used to. But we hear the opposing words a lot, treason and betrayal. People are constantly, John Kerry recently, and the whole Obama thing, even with the birth certificate alleged issue, is part of a question of, is he one of us? Accusations of disloyalty are very, very common. And yet there is a real puzzle here, I think, making sense in this context. Let me put the puzzle this way. Suppose that you are loyal to your country or loyal to your country's leader or whatever it is. either you have good objective reasons for doing that and for, agreeing with what he's doing, or you don't. But if you have good objective reasons for it, then it's not clear why you need additional loyalty reasons. You've already got good reasons. And if you don't have good objective reasons for supporting what your country's doing, then it's not clear why the reasons of loyalty ought to have any credence.
Well, let's push you on that question, though. First, I'm going to give out the number again, remind our callers. We're talking about loyalty with our guest poet and philosopher, Troy Jollimore. We'd love to have you join this discussion. 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917. Or as always, you can email us at comments@philosophytalk.org. But Troy, the reasoning you just gave about how you're really not loyal to your country because, either you have good reasons or you don't. Well, think about that. I just want to transpose that to the individual case. Okay, why am I so loyal to my wife or my children or my friends? Well, because they're so special. Right. Well, okay. If the reason I'm loyal to them is that they're so special, then it's just like a calculation of self-interest or what would be best. And if they're not so special, then why do they deserve my loyalty? Why these friends rather than some others? I mean, what's up with that? I mean, taking your own reasoning seems like a problem for even interpersonal relations of loyalty.
It might be, and there is a puzzling aspect to the fact of the bruteness of the relationship. Why are these my people? Why is this my sports team? And I think as we think about that, we can get ourselves into a puzzle. But I do think that we can fall back on the fact that it is, as we said earlier, hard to imagine a truly flourishing human life that didn't have any loyalty in it, not only because my own loyalties are so good for me in terms of giving me purpose and direction, but also it's extremely good for me that there are other individuals who are loyal to me, because then I can trust them. And I can't imagine having a good human life if there were nobody around that I could really trust and say, that person's going to stand by me even on those occasions when I do screw up, because they're going to look at me and see my potential and think, he's going to come back from that and be better after that. So, sorry, go ahead.
We've got an interesting email. I'd like to say it's an email from a loyal listener, but since the listener ends up by saying, you guys should be on vacation, I'm going to go for a hike. I'm not sure that's the right thing to call him.
He may be the loyal opposition.
Yes, he's Greg. And Greg says loyalties are BS. Just for effect, he says, I'll repeat that. Loyalties are BS. Principles should always trump loyalty. Totally. He gives a number of examples, including philosophy professors have blind tribal loyalty to their fellow faculty members and so refuse to speak out when it is obviously called for. Principles are not the same as loyalties. Principles are rationally decided, while loyalties are the result of mindless, unquestioned animal tribalism. And then he says, I think, as a way of bringing you into the conversation, Troy, poets have absolutely the least to say usefully about this issue, so naturally, that's who you chose.
Well, but he's also a philosopher, Greg. But anyway, Troy, speak up.
Defend loyalty. Defend yourself.
I appreciate having the issue put in such stark terms. I think that's wonderful. I am suspicious of loyalty, as I'm sure I've been clear on, but I'm also suspicious of principles. We can talk in the abstract about the wonderfulness of principles and how great they are in deciding things, but when the rubber hits the road and we actually look for those principles, we can't agree on what they are. When we do agree, it's a wonderful thing. But in fact, in a lot of cases, we don't have the principles to rationally decide these questions in a way that everyone is happy with. And we do have to end up falling back on something else. Not hopefully blind tribal loyalties, but some sort of commitment and devotion and integrity, I think, can be a very good thing.
Well, let's go back to the opening discussion Ken and I had, and we brought up utilitarianism. Now, when you read Peter Singer or some other really persuasive utilitarians, or go back to J.J.C. Smart, or John Stuart Mill, it can be a very compelling philosophy. But then when you draw out the consequences, that really, what reason do I have to give my children a fair amount of money so that they can continue to live in the Bay Area when that money could allow, literally dozens of people to have better lives throughout the world? It's very hard, and it seems hard to live a life without giving some special credence to the relationships that utilitarians kind of say really should play no role. Is loyalty just another name for the idea that it's okay to have special care and concern for those that have certain special relationships to you, and it doesn't have to be rationally based on any principle other than that?
I think it's closely related to that. It's not just the idea that it's okay because, in fact, loyalty makes requirements and demands of us. It doesn't just give us permission to do certain things and lavish special attention on people. It tells us that we have to or obligated to. But it does occupy that sort of middle ground between pure self-interest, I'm just going to take care of myself, and the pure impartiality that utilitarianism would require.
You're listening. Go ahead.
The way I got started on this stuff was that I was at a party when I was a grad student, and another grad student was telling me about Shelley Kagan's book, in which he defends a kind of utilitarianism, basically. And she told me what he said about friendship, when he says that in that book that you can be somebody's friend and yet not be partial to them at all. And I thought, that can't possibly be right. That's just so obviously wrong. Shelley Kagan is too smart to say that sort of thing. And I went and looked it up, and sure enough, he said it. And so I started writing a paper about it, and that became my dissertation.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're discussing loyalty with Troy Jollimore. The number to call is 1-800-525-9917. 1-800-525-9917. We've got William from Belvedere on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, William.
Yes, thank you very much. I must say, as it goes, you're playing my song. In that, I have found it quite liberating to stop describing what the United States does, for instance, invading Iraq, etc., with the term we did this or we did that. I realize that I, as an individual, and I think a whole lot of other people, really have nothing whatsoever to do with being able to control such a policy, and therefore using we implies a kind of a loyalty which involves a kind of control which I believe we do not have, and I would appreciate the comments of the guest.
Thanks for the question, William. Troy, I think he's getting. I think I want to press the question just a little bit more, because I think he's getting at something deep and something that's a response to that emailer, Greg. Through loyalties, we form collectivities that are bound together as entities in the world, right? And that's an important thing. That's an empowering thing, and it makes your actions have more reach than just you being an atom. Well, what do you think about that?
I think that in practical terms, that's quite true, and it is an empowering thing. But I also tend to think that, at least when we start thinking about responsibility and so on, that it is a fiction. I'm very, as the caller seems to be, very hesitant about the idea of collective responsibility. And so I think that when the United States acts, I don't want to say the public has no responsibility, because obviously somebody voted in the people who are making those decisions. And I think if you support a leader knowing that they're going to do likely bad things and they do bad things, you have some responsibility. But I would completely agree that the people who voted against that person and who tried to avoid the countries going in that direction really have no responsibility.
Well, wait a minute, though. Our responsibility as Americans, as the loyal opposition, let's suppose, doesn't end with, well, we voted against it, so we don't have any more obligation. Well, we have an obligation out of love and loyalty to the nation of which we're a member to try and change those policies, to advocate, to argue, to speak up. I mean, that's not just the act of an outsider saying bad on you. That's like bad on us, and that matters. That gives our voice a certain power. Don't you think?
I do agree with that. The obligation doesn't simply stop with the voting. There's much more that's required. But if you've done enough in addition, and if you've really tried to steer the country in a certain direction, and too many people are against you and you lose, there is this popular idea that somehow as a citizen of a country you do share a burden of responsibility for whatever that country does. And I'm very resistant to that.
Well, if you consider people in Germany, my generation would be the war generation, that is the ones that were born during the war. They clearly were not responsible in any way for Nazism and the successive generation, and yet those people have shown a lot of feelings of responsibility. I mean, they've really worked to make West Germany originally, and now Germany, a much different kind of place. So yeah, I think in a way it was irrational, but it was a good irrationality that they really felt that somehow it was their job to clean up the mess that they obviously weren't responsible for.
I want to go back to our thought experiment at the very top. Imagine a person with no particular loyalties, right? No particular attachment. What would such a human life be like?
Well,
it would be a really odd thing. You'd be a stranger everywhere, as it were.
It'd be a little bit like Gregory, who's apparently now actually gone on his hike.
Yeah. So what do you think? Could a human, psychologically, I'm not talking about morally yet, but psychologically, are human beings built to live without concrete particular loyalties? It doesn't seem to me that we are.
Yeah, not typically. It would be a very odd human being. I think about, if you've seen the movie No Country for Old Men, the character of Anton Chigurh, the hitman played by Javier Bardem, is very similar to that sort of person. He seems to have no attachments to anyone or any country or anything. And it certainly seems a very diminished human life. The existence of such people is obviously bad for us, but it's bad for themselves too, I think.
Right. Dan in Palo Alto's on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Dan.
Hi, thanks. I had a question going back to the idea of utilitarianism and this idea that loyalty can be very dangerous at times. How we can tell when it's okay to be loyal, what kinds of groups it's okay to be loyal, and what kind of groups it just constitutes bigotry or discrimination.
Right. That's a very good question, Dan. You know, the loyal Nazi versus the loyal, resistance fighter kind of thing. What do you think,
Now,
Troy?
Again, Royce had an answer to this question, and sadly, I think it's a very, very lousy answer, but it's a very famous one, and so I'll say it because of its fame. He talked about something he called loyalty to loyalty, and he said, because he wanted an ethics that could be entirely derived from loyalty, and so he said, the test is that if your loyalty is such as to maximize loyalty in the world or maximize opportunities for others to be loyal, then it's a good thing, and if it diminishes those, then it's a bad thing. And the very obvious problem with this is that what Hitler did say and what the Nazis did, to go back to that example, in many ways scores very highly on this criterion because World War II gave people all over the world great opportunities to show their loyalty in ways that they couldn't have otherwise. And so clearly he helped loyalty flourish in that way. And it was a terrible thing. In fact, I often think that a world in which there were far fewer opportunities to show one's loyalty might be a much better world than the one we have.
So that means that human lives, if we all kind of got rid of these tribal loyalties and were loyal and pursued the truth and beauty and all that and right and wrong independently of loyalties, maybe we'd be better off. This goes back to Greg's point again. Maybe we'd be better off without these divisive loyalties.
I do still think there would be a place for the personal loyalties, which are divisive to a degree, but I think to an acceptable degree in most circumstances. But yeah, the larger loyalties, if we could learn to get by without those, I think that might be a very good thing.
But if we step out of philosophy for a minute and look at it psychologically, it seems to me that it's a very important fact about a person what their loyalties are, that these loyalties are by and large shaped by irrational is the wrong word, irrational processes. I mean, your bonds between your family are just natural, and your bonds to your baseball teams are formed when you're a pre-adolescent. So they are basically irrational, and yet they're very important. And with that, I think we'll break and come back in a minute.
We'll take up that very issue. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're discussing loyalty with philosopher and poet Troy Jollimore.
In our next segment, the costs and demands of loyalty. What do you do when loyalty asks too much, when loyalty is betrayed or misplaced? Must loyalty be reciprocated in order for it to be rational?
Weighing the cost of loyalty when Philosophy Talk continues.
You can stay loyal to an unworthy lover, or a losing hometown team, or even a morally suspect cause. But at what cost? I'm John Perry. This is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything
except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor. Loyalty is what we're talking about with celebrated poet and philosopher Troy Jollimore. So I want to go back to what John was saying as we were going into break. I want to ask you, why isn't loyalty almost always a form of irrationality? I mean, almost always. Let's go back to one of my favorite forms of loyalty to your spouse. Imagine that someone comes along, I mean, just counterfactually, someone comes along who would actually be better for you, somebody who would make you happier, who would make you a better person, bring out the best in you. But out of loyalty, sheer loyalty, you don't pursue that person. Tell me why that isn't a form of irrational self-denial.
We just want to clarify, this is a completely
Completely hypothetical.
counterfactual flight of imagination.
Yeah. Tell me why that isn't a form of irrational self-denial.
There's a great deal to be said about this, and I've actually written quite a bit in a book that will come out next year. And this is, in a way, the main question of this book.
That's called Love's Vision, right?
It's called Love's Vision, that's right. Here's a very, very quick nutshell answer to that. The thought that must be irrational depends on a deficient view of rationality, which equates it with this kind of maximizing rationality. That's completely appropriate in some contexts. As an economic agent, perhaps, you really ought to maximize. But you can't apply that kind of thinking to other contexts. And in the context of love and friendship in particular, such relationships wouldn't even be possible for a person who was always on the lookout for the better thing and ready to move on to that. The very idea of commitment, I think, in those contexts requires a certain mindset that says that you're not always looking and you're not always thinking about that.
But let's press you for, I see your point. So loyalty is a condition of the possibility, as philosophers like to say, of certain kinds of relationships, right? But those relationships that loyalty makes possible are inherently costly, right?
Yes.
So there has to be a cost-benefit analysis at least. And once there's a cost-benefit analysis, it's like, wait a minute, right? I get to weigh the cost and benefits of these loyalties, and it looks like they're always, I mean, unless the person to whom you commit to is so wonderful that he or she really outweighs any other alternative, then it doesn't look like it's rational to commit. And if somebody else comes along and offers you the possibility, I don't see that you've out of the puzzle yet.
I think there's a bit of a slippery slope argument going on here, which is to say, you seem to be suggesting that if we're aware at all of the cost-benefit analysis, then we must be thinking about it all the time and always looking. And I don't think that's true. And maybe I should say this. I'm willing to acknowledge that past a certain point, it can be rational and reasonable to leave a friend or leave a lover in particular where, our society demands monogamy for the most part, to leave one relationship for another. I'm not one of those people who support unconditional love and unconditional commitment and say once you're tied to somebody, you have to stay with that person no matter what happens. I do think there's a line. On the other hand, the person who is too conscious of that and who is thinking about that all the time and always looking for the next opportunity that's a little better is not going to be able to have such relationships.
So we've got an interesting email, a very short one, from a fellow named Oldus, and he says, what about existential loyalists? To what are they loyal? And that's a little brief, but to me it raises this question. I mean, we think that the contrast with loyalty here in a conversation has been rationality. Rationality is you have your values and you weigh them and you make your decision. But the existentialist might say you don't have values till you act. Your action determines your values. So it's not that your values ought to overweight your loyalties. It's your loyalties ought to frame your values. Is existentialism a friendly philosopher for loyalists? Doesn't sound like Royce too much.
No, it's not like Royce. And I think there's a certain grain of truth in that, in a sense. I do believe there are objective values, and in fact that the world is full of them. And really the problem that we're faced with is not that there aren't any and we have to create them as the existentialists think, but rather that, and this is more like Royce, that there's so many of them that we can't act on them all, and so we have to choose. But there is such a thing, on my view, as a choice that some people would describe as existential or nearly so, because I believe in moral dilemmas. I believe you can get into a point where you have conflicting loyalties, for instance, and you just can't honor both. And there's no rational way of deciding which one to choose.
And there's no principle that will help you out. We've got a caller online, Joanne in San Francisco. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Joanne.
Hi. I want to have you talk about a dilemma, which I consider terrible, that I've encountered in the workplace, which I'm sure is very common. I'm an employee, and my boss is making a decision that I think is obviously wrong. Do I do the right thing out of principle and tell him, or do I remain silent because of loyalty and self-preservation reasons? I have in mind career advancement opportunities, and I don't want to offend him.
Well, thanks, Joanne. Yeah. You got some practical advice for Joanne, Troy?
My first, I know suddenly I feel like Dr. Fraser Crane or something, but my first thing I wanted to say is that I think that loyalty, if it's either to the boss or to the organization, actually wouldn't require that you stay silent. That loyalty would, in fact, call on you to be honest and speak your opinion. That's what true loyalty would demand. Self-interest, on the other hand, might speak in the other direction. If your boss is really going to resent that, then you're in a bit of a dilemma, maybe of the sort that I described a moment ago.
So that sounds like you think loyalty is loyalty to something like a person's objective good. Right. I mean, rather than what they take to be their good. The boss might be, a self-deceiving whatever, and he would regard the truth speaker as disloyal, right?
Right.
The whistleblower as disloyal. But it sounds like your notion of loyalty is conditioned by some concern for what's objectively good, right, true, something.
I think that's right. I think the loyalty is to the person in this case, but that it does demand that you speak the truth and, yes, address the objective good and not simply be a yes man and say, oh, this is what you want to hear.
So suppose we change Joanne's dilemma just slightly. So it's that your boss has done something that's wrong, and you've told him that, and that didn't stop him. But your loyalty to the company suggests you should go over his head. But your loyalty to him suggests you shouldn't. That's conflicting loyalties. Is there any principled way someone who believes in loyalty can decide among loyalties?
I doubt that there's a principled way. I think that it would rely on an individual judgment as to something like it's part of what loyalty is all about is forgiving people their mistakes to a degree, saying, they're getting better. They're not. This isn't reflective of truly them. If you think that this mistake is part of a longer pattern and he's just going to keep doing the same thing, you should probably go over his head. If you think it was a minor slip up from which he can come back and that there's a better person in there, then you might want to kind of try to ride it out with him, try to talk it over with him, make him that better person, make him at least see the possibilities.
See, I'm getting a little bit confused here, Troy. I want to separate it. I want to take apart a couple different things. So I have these loyalties and the demands of loyalty, and I'm trying to figure out what loyalty demands. So in the case where my company, my boss, my son has done something wrong, right, and needs, I might think, well, I ought to make evident to them the wrongness of what they did. And suppose I do that, and they still are recalcitrant and won't admit it and won't, and they get angry at me. Now, is it loyalty that now guides me, or is it like abstract principles of morality that guide me? If it's always abstract principles of morality that guide me, right? He did something wrong. You ought not to support wrongdoing. You ought to blah, blah, blah. Then it doesn't seem like loyalty is the weighty thing. Loyalty is okay until it conflicts with more abstract moral principles, and then they take over.
Well, I think there are limits to loyalty, but I think that what loyalty tells us is not to be too rigid in applying those abstract principles of morality, to stand by people to a degree, to let them be imperfect because people are imperfect, to wait and see and not immediately rush into judgment and say, okay, you've made a mistake, I'm through with you, that's it. But to give the relationship a certain amount of room. But I do certainly think that there is a line. There are certain things such that once a person has done them, you ought not to stand by them anymore. And that is where I don't like thinking of morality in terms of abstract principles, but where objective morality in whatever form it takes does step in.
So we got some email from Demi, and he raises a lot of issues, but I'm just going to pick off the lead question, which is, are you being loyal if you are an enabler? So enabling is a concept that I imagine is post-Roycian. An enabler is a person who helps an addict or some kind of neurotic do the things they want to do, but not the things they should do. Now, so is enabling a form of loyalty, or is it something that loyalty really helps us overcome?
I would have to say that enabling can be motivated by loyalty and certainly can be motivated by love, but is not the wisest course. And so the truly loyal person ought not to do it. But I think that the content here is not necessarily coming from the loyalty. I'm not sure that the idea of loyalty tells us what to do. It just tells us something much more vague, which is if you're loyal to this person, try to do whatever is best for them.
Aren't some loyalties misguided, though, or misplaced? I mean, I know they're misplaced loyalty when the object of your loyalty would betray your trust. So loyalty and trust are kind of twins. But loyalty and Hitler, wasn't that just misplaced? I mean, even if you supported his thing, you were his co-conspirator, still there's something morally objectionable about that loyalty.
Absolutely. I do not think that loyalty is always a good thing. I'm quite skeptical about the idea that it is a virtue. It may be that it's a virtue in certain contexts when it's directed correctly. I haven't made up my mind about that. But I think my view at these days tends more towards the idea that there are certain traits that we like to see in human beings, and a lot of those are virtues. But loyalty is one that isn't a virtue, but we still like to see it. When somebody's loyal to me, it makes me think highly of them. And I sort of think like they're a better person. But of course, that's not true. They're not a better person because they're my friend. It just feels that way to me.
So at the beginning, this is the last question we'll get to ask you. At the beginning, we said loyalties help constitute our identities in a thick and important way, such that people without them would hardly be recognizable. Now it seems as though you're thinking we need to choose our loyalties very, very carefully. Is that right?
I do think that, and I think precisely because they're so important in constituting our identity, it's a very, very important sort of decision and sort of self-forming activity that we ought not to take lightly or rush into.
On that note of wise advice, Troy, I'm going to thank you for joining us. It's been a scintillating conversation. Our guest has been Troy Jollimore, professor of philosophy from Cal State University at Chico. He's an award-winning poet. He's author of Friendship and Agent Relative Morality and the forthcoming Love's Vision. So, John, where do your loyalties lie now? What's your final thoughts about loyalty?
Well, we had a rather interesting discussion. I think we're ending up with a view that's something like, loyalties are a little bit like vices, right? I mean, it's irrational for me to eat fatty foods. It's irrational for me to eat high salt foods. It's irrational for me to drink. It's irrational for me to smoke. Now, I can't avoid all those irrationalities, but I ought to be careful and choose the important ones. So we seem to be saying loyal to something like that. Everybody's going to be loyal to something, or if their life is worth living, and it's important to their identity, what they're loyal to, and they should be very, very careful about it. But still, in the end, you can't give much rational justification for loyalties.
Well, I think you can give a little bit of a rational justification because loyalties make certain kind of relationships possible. I think Troy's right about that, and that's the real thing. Without loyalty, certain kinds of relationship wouldn't be possible at all, and that's the way of justifying them. Of course, they have their limits. They have their big and important limits. But you know what? This conversation continues, as always, on our blog. It's already started, theblog.philosophytalk.org, and we have this really happening Facebook page, thousands and thousands of fans. Go check it out and join the conversation.
You can also download podcasts from our website. And for the final word, we're going to turn to the loyal comments of Ian Scholes, the 60-second philosopher.
Ian Scholes, when I was a kid, there was a neighbor who would buy a new Ford every 2 years. We used to call that brand loyalty, and it was admired. Today it seems insane. Why buy American when American bets on that perceived loyalty to make crappy products? And now, thanks to the internet and Walmart, we can find cheaper generic versions of the brands we covet. We consider ourselves savvy shoppers, even as the economy collapses around us. We still have some brand loyalty. I use Crest toothpaste exclusively. Don't know why. People prefer Budweiser over Miller, Coke over Pepsi. People kill each other over Nikes, for God's sake. And there's Apple, whose adherents not only buy anything with the logo, they think of themselves as smarter than everybody else for doing so. There's also team loyalty, on the wane. When I was a kid, you associated Mickey Mantle with the New York Yankees. It was unthinkable he would have played for any other team, which contributed to fan loyalty. Today, when players' contracts expire, they can shop themselves out as free agents. Players jump around from team to team, getting more money with each hop until they get too old to play. Free agent basketball player LeBron James came under fire when he left the Cleveland Cavaliers for the Miami Heat. He was criticized for making his announcement on an hour-long ESPN special, which his people paid for. I can understand the flap over that. How long does it take to say you're joining a new team? 5, 6 seconds? What did he fill the rest of the hour with? Not dancing girls, jugglers, and fire eaters, I'm betting. His decision to leave was met with heartbreak in Ohio, where he had been a local hero. Dan Gilbert, who owns the Cavaliers, wrote an open letter to fans saying that LeBron James had deserted team, state, and fans. He wrote, quote, "You simply don't deserve this kind of cowardly betrayal," unquote. Following the news, a mural of LeBron James was removed in Cleveland. In Miami, meanwhile, in anticipation of King James' arrival, hotel reservations are up. A blog I read claimed that his being on the team could have a positive effect on property values in Miami. He already has a snack named for him, the LeBron James Bratwurst at the Shake Shack in South Beach. People magazine online burbled about places where LeBron can go once he's settled in. Quote, Coco DeVille is a celebrity favorite. There's free candy and an intimate vibe that has drawn a who's who of young Hollywood, including Ed Westwick and the Kardashian sisters. For lazy beachside afternoons, head to the Fontainebleau. Sip mojitos poolside in a spot that's hosted R&R by the likes of Lady Gaga and Kate Hudson, unquote. So there you go. Free candy with the Kardashian sisters. Mojitos with Kate Hudson. Beats Cleveland, that's for sure. Who needs loyalty when you have D-list celebrities? A list which LeBron James will no doubt join 15 years from now. And when you get there, say hi to Bruce Jenner, will you? And Ed Westwick, too, wherever he is. I gotta go.
Ian Scholes, the only man who can solve a philosophical problem in 60 seconds.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University, copyright 2010.
Our executive producer is David Demarest.
Our production coordinator is Devin Strolovich. Our directors of research are Daniel Elstein and Ben Hirsch. Lael Weiss is our webmaster.
Also thanks to Chris Hoff, Merle Kessler, Corey Goldman, and Mark Stone.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from various groups at Stanford University, the Friends of Philosophy Talk, and the members of KALW San Francisco, where our program originates.
The views expressed or misexpressed on this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our other funders.
The conversation continues on our website, philosophytalk.org. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.